All right, so we're going to jump straight into our next session so that we can try and keep ourselves on track here. This is a really exciting, interesting talk. It's Fast and Furious, Hacking Cars with APIs. And I'm joined by Shira and Daniel from Upstream. And I'm really excited to hear this talk because I've been in a couple of other talks where I heard about, some of these hacks and exploits, and it's a fascinating topic and a little scary, right? given the prevalence of APIs in cars and what can go wrong if they're hacked. It's not quite just my data that's being accessed, right? So welcome and take it away.
Hi, Christine. Great to be here this morning. And let me give you a spoiler. There's some good news towards the end. So stay tuned. But it's lovely to be here. I'm Shira. I'm the Vice President of Marketing for Upstream Security. We are a startup based out of Tel Aviv, and we have developed a cybersecurity purpose-built detection response platform for automotive. So we know a little bit about cyber and a little bit about cars, and we're happy to share some of these insights this morning. Daniel, can you also introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everybody. Super great to be here. My name is Daniel Blum, and I'm a product manager here at Upstream Security, where I manage our API security and threat intelligence products. I've been at the company for about 2 years, and my background comes from threat intelligence and cybersecurity, and I'm really, really glad to be here.
Awesome. So let's get started. And the best way to start it is with someone smart, right? So the chairman of the board of directors of BMW stated a few interesting arguments in a conference just back in March in Munich. And one of the things he said that we have the responsibility for cybersecurity over the entire life cycle of the vehicle. Now, when we think about vehicles, we may think, okay, cars needs to be protected when they're out of the factory, right? And when we buy them as consumers. But this is not the game anymore. As we all control our cars with our mobile phones, it means that APIs are going to be a part of the ecosystem of the car throughout its entire life cycle. And let's dive a little bit deeper.
Okay, so for those of you not familiar, Upstream's annual Global Cybersecurity Automotive Incident Report is the industry's most extensive report gathering automotive cybersecurity incidents. Each year, our experts, analysts, and researchers gather and classify automotive cybersecurity incidents and draw conclusions, analyze trends, and also make some foreseeing into the future. And so, as you can immediately notice in this slide, in the past 5 years, there's been a dramatic increase in these events, in the number of these events. And as you can see, this is really almost a 400% increase. And so if you ask our experts, they attribute this increase to two main factors. The first factor is the ever-increasing connectivity of vehicles. If I were to look about 5 years ago, a vehicle was an almost disconnected device, sometimes maybe connected to OEM telematics servers. However, if we look today, the vehicles are part of an ever-growing interconnected system that continues introducing new connectivity streams into the vehicle. And as you know, in cybersecurity, connectivity also means threat vectors. And though we are very happy with connectivity and we know that it brings a lot of value and a lot of opportunity for revenue streams, it also brings a lot of more ways, a lot of newer vectors for the threat actors, for the bad guys to come in. Now, the second factor attributing to this massive growth in numbers of incidents is what we define as the SDV, the software-defined vehicle. This means that each year, more and more parts of the vehicle are becoming digital and are becoming computerized. And that basically means that once hackers have gotten in through one of the many and increasing amount of ways that they could get into a vehicle and hack it, there are more and more parts that could be affected by their hacks, and the impact that they could drive is much bigger and much scarier. Now, when we started Upstream 5 years ago and we started looking at these incidents, we were at a place where the majority of them was actually carried out by researchers, by white hats, and this is something that we can often see in the cybersecurity world, where the technologists are kind of the first ones on the scene and they set the warning. However, unfortunately for us as an industry, about 2 years ago, we crossed that chasm. And as you can see now, a vast majority of automotive cybersecurity incidents are carried out by black hat threat actors, by the bad guys who are aiming to leverage new technology and leverage the industry's most recent communications and systems in order to gain their own profit and hurt us. And this is, generally speaking, not such good news for us as an industry.
So looking into what those black hats are interested in, this slide is focused on showing you the different attack vectors. And just like in any other scope of cybersecurity, there are different ways to hack a car. So if you just think about what's being published in the media, most of the incidents that you hear about is related to car theft. And these are those 18% of incidents that are related to key fobs, right? But at the end of the day, if someone, steals my car, I'm going to be pissed. It's going to be annoying. Is it going to change the world? Probably not. It's more of an insurance game, right? So yes, there is trust and brand and all these sorts of things, but it's not a game changer. We need to talk about more massive scale to make it really interesting. So let's go deeper. And then we see 14% of incidents are related to ECUs. ECUs are the small computers that are in our vehicles today. Now, every vehicle has anywhere between 100 and even hundreds of different small computers. Think about them as many iPhones on wheels. And you can go after those ECUs. But here's the trick. It's kind of hard. And it's complicated and you need a lot of expertise. And we'll touch on that in just 1 minute. So what we see is that those both researchers, the white hats and the black hats, are trying to find ways to get impact on vehicles through other systems. So infotainments, which are a big part, a strategic part of the vehicle today, have been a target, and they account for 8%. 12% account for APIs. It starts to sound familiar, right? And just to give you a hint for it, these 12% were just 2% a year ago. So there's been a dramatic spike in API-related attacks just because of that. It lowers the threshold. But look at something else that's interesting. 35% of attacks are directly related to backend systems. This is the IT world, right? And we've just heard Colin's talk about the new OWASP. And this is where it starts to kind of mash between the vehicle world, the OT side of the house, and the IT side of the house. And of course, APIs are a big part of that. But I want to draw your attention to something small before we move on. So it's 4% at the top. For the first time last year, we saw cybersecurity attacks against EV charging infrastructure. This is massive because of the amazing impact that these attacks may carry. Now, we've been seeing research around attacks against local power grids and all sorts of other interesting elements, but we need to remember that a big chunk of the charging process is actually dominated by APIs. So this is becoming extremely interesting. Now, when we are trying to understand the incentive behind using APIs, well, like anything else in the world, APIs fuel new revenue opportunities. And this research by McKinsey, though it's a little bit old, but it's still kind of interesting, it predicts that by 2030, 30% of car makers' revenue will be coming from API-driven applications and services. If you remember the BMW heated seats fiasco last year, this feature is enabled by APIs, right? And consumers are now trying to think about how they can bypass those new features. So as car makers are thinking about all these new digital experience and revenue streams, they also have to take into account that it's becoming a new attack vector that needs to be dealt with.
And so, as we mentioned earlier, 5 years ago, if you were to look at a vehicle, it seemed like a almost not connected device. But for us at Upstream, from the start, our vision was an understanding that a vehicle is part of an ever-evolving ecosystem, growing and expanding on its connectivity streams. And as we can see here in the slide today vehicles are part of a wide, intricate chain of connectivity that are powered by APIs as an incredibly efficient and powerful tool in driving innovation and providing revenue streams and opportunities all around. And so, as you can see, nowadays we don't only have vehicles, and as Shira mentioned earlier, we have mobile apps communicating to vehicles, we have web apps powered by different third parties, and in general, other third-party tools. And of course, an interesting, new, and exciting addition, the charging stations. And many of them, if not to say all, are powered by APIs, because as we know so well here at API Days, APIs are so powerful and so efficient. And you can see so many different examples at the bottom of different streams of services that could be added to vehicles via APIs. But as I also said earlier, unfortunately for us in the cybersecurity world, we know that revenue streams, that connectivity vectors are at the end of the day quick to become attack vectors. And these APIs, while being so powerful and so useful in delivering technology and communications and revenue, at the end of the day, they're also used by hackers to reach the cars, to impact them, and to damage them. And so as we see here, suddenly the vehicles are connected to all these different vectors that are connected to APIs, and they are all prone to the OWASP API top 10 that Colin so greatly just mentioned and walked us through just before. And so we see that suddenly vehicles who are some sort of a disconnected niche are now fully facing all these grave risks and grave dangers that are presented by API attacks. Now, it's not only the growth of the threat landscape and the threat vectors for vehicles, but rather when it comes to API attacks, we have a bigger problem. If you look at attacks before APIs, of course, they were not easy to detect. However, some could argue that they were maybe slightly easier to detect, given that oftentimes their signatures were pretty loud and we were able to easily detect injection attempts and denial of service attacks. However, with APIs, we're facing a problem. They actually say with APIs, every attack is a zero-day attack. And why is that said? Because oftentimes API attackers leverage intricate business logic of each API to drive very specific and special attacks that don't look the same. And you could see nowadays that over 50% of API attacks are actually done with authenticated users, meaning that attackers don't need to hack into the API. They are already in. And now they just need to slowly navigate their way, making lateral movements, and slowly using another misconfiguration and another vulnerability and another business logic flaw, adding permissions, escalating their privileges. And so that when they finally carry out the final attack, it is very painful. And this is something that is so difficult to track and detect and raise awareness of. And when it comes to the world of smart mobility, we have a whole new layer of complexity when it comes to protecting APIs. Because unlike standard IT devices that can be listened to or that data can be stolen from, vehicles and other cyber physical elements are also moving in space, and causing cyber damage to them may actually have an effect in real life and in the physical space that we live in. And the idea of trying to understand their behavior and their business logic becomes ever so complicated when it comes to cyber physical API security.
So now let's go in and look at some real numbers, right? So we mentioned that APIs are now 12% of total automotive and smart mobility cybersecurity incidents, looking at 2022. And this number represents almost a 400% growth just year over year compared to 2021. And the reason is exactly what Daniel just mentioned, right? APIs are, first of all, everywhere, even in the automotive industry. And they're sort of spread around different elements and vector and surfaces that need to be considered. But one of the main reasons that you see this quite dramatic growth is the scale that they offer. So looking at scale, let's go back to 2015. I don't know how many of you remember the Cherokee incident. It sort of shook the automotive world, and for a good reason. So what happened back in 2015 is one of the first attempts to manipulate vehicles via cybersecurity threats. And what happened is that a researcher took 3 years to figure out his car, figure out how it works, and find ways to exploit vulnerabilities. Now, at the end, he was able to deeply manipulate the vehicle controls. Sounds kind of scary, right? But at the end of the day, it is just a single vehicle. And the impact on us as an ecosystem was kind of narrow. So though scary, maybe not too scary. But if we fast forward to 2022, scale comes into the game through the form of API-related car hacks, which Daniel will walk you through.
Okay, so I want to talk about the connection between API security and the smart mobility through the stories of two researchers. And so the researchers I will be mentioning are David Colombo and Sam Curry. Now, interestingly enough, the two of them have a lot in common. They're both very young, brilliant researchers or white hat hackers who do not come from the world of automotive, do not have automotive expertise. David did not even have a car. But through IT methods and web hacking methodologies, they were able to stumble into this world of automotive hacking and were able to carry out massive damage and virtually shake our entire industry. And so with that being said, let's dig into these specific stories. David Colombo, who is actually quite a good friend and was actually visiting our offices a few weeks ago, at the age of 19, operating out of Germany, he was working for a client and doing some pen testing and research when he stumbled onto a third-party API that had some connection to Tesla. Now, we have a technical issue with the slide, so we're missing a picture and you're not seeing it. But if you were to see it, you could see that David says himself that he stumbled upon it completely by accident. But what came next is his curiosity, which drove him to continue investigating and unraveling one misconfiguration and one flaw at a time. He was actually able to reach a stage where he felt he had the ability to control the vehicles from his computer. And so obviously at the age of 19 in Germany, David did not have a Tesla, but he wanted to verify that what he thinks he's seeing is actually what he saw. So in a very funny anecdote that he actually shared with us at our offices, he describes a scenario in which he's reaching out to the owners of Teslas, which he thinks he can control, and asking them for permission to test out these abilities on their vehicles. And so we saw this whole communication between him and a Tesla owner who was at a Walmart. And while they were communicating, David was actually unlocking and locking the doors of his Tesla, turning up the heat and the volume, and starting and turning off the motor. David was able to demonstrate this for over 25 Teslas all over the world. And this is just where he stopped. This is from a third-party API, not connected directly to the vehicle, with a hacker who does not have automotive in mind, and it does not come from an automotive background, but is able to, in a matter of a few weeks, reach this level of damage. And this is the story of APIs and the automotive world. But if you think this story is wild, let's wait till we hear about Sam Curry. As I mentioned earlier, Sam Curry is quite similar. He's also a young, brilliant researcher coming from web hacking, from IT hacking, no automotive expertise, and he kind of stumbled onto this industry. And Sam Curry describes in a very interesting article, which I highly recommend everybody to read, describes how he and his team were able to impact 15 different OEMs and carry out massive potential damage in being exposed to sensitive data, in being able to operate and carry out actions on vehicles themselves. But I think that the main story comes to show when it comes to API security in the smart mobility industry, and that's very clearly demonstrated to Sam Curry's incident, is when he describes how he did what any other efficient and smart hacker would do when trying to maximize value for money. So at some point in the research, Sam Curry describes how he and his team realized that while they were able to carry out interesting damage and reach interesting results from attacking specific OEMs, if they could just go one layer up and target an organization who is connected to many OEMs, they could carry out much more dramatic impact with much less effort. And so that's exactly what they did. Targeting SiriusXM, a very, very major player in the world of telematics, they were actually able to impact multiple OEMs, multiple vehicle models through one organization. And if I asked you to guess what's behind this connectivity, you would all know the answer. These are APIs, And this is the dramatic story behind the connectivity of API security in the smart mobility industry. And as somebody coming from the threat intelligence world, I know to say that one of the most dangerous things that can happen in threat intelligence is when a cybercrime niche becomes democratized. And we have seen in this past few years that the democratization of API security and of API risks and threats and of automotive cybersecurity is fueled by APIs. These are what allow this interconnectivity, this coming together of the IT, the IoT, and the OT.
So essentially, following Daniel's examples, real life examples, APIs are the fast and furious component, right? They're the ones who are fueling not only opportunities for automakers, but certainly making it much easier, not going to say easy, but easier to manipulate vehicles through API-related vulnerabilities. So just to really quickly summarize it, what we've seen is that unlike the Jeep Cherokee example, where it took 3 years to hack one car, when it comes to APIs, they enable massive scale of impact on millions and millions of vehicles worldwide. You don't need to be close to the car. All you need to do is figure out which apps it's connected to, whether those are mobile apps or backend systems. The level of expertise is far lower than required in a typical cybersecurity, especially when it comes to automotive. So overall, the time to attack becomes much, much faster. Daniel, can you give us, I know we don't have much more time, can you give us a bit of information on the blind spot of the IT approach to API security?
Absolutely. And so we spoke in detail about the attacks, but let's talk a little bit about defense. And so as cybersecurity professionals aiming to protect our APIs, when it comes to smart mobility industry, we have two main aspects. The first one being what we all know to be the API inventory, the IT infrastructure of the organization. But on the other side, just as important, we have the connected vehicle with this inner vehicle communication and data and systems. And what we fear and we see in today's IT-driven approach for protecting APIs is that there is this major blind spot in being this vehicle data, these vehicle systems, that maybe limit the cybersecurity professionals from seeing the entirety of what they need to protect when it comes to protecting APIs and the API inventory in its entirety.
Now, what's fascinating is that these new technologies that are essentially born in Michigan for the automotive industry are revolutionizing the API security landscape, and they're introducing new ways of protecting applications and services. They're introducing sort of an IoT, OT related approach that's bringing in all these different angles of the operational systems that are related to vehicles, but making it sort of, again, democratizing solutions, right? And making them available across the board. So Daniel, if you can touch a little bit on this unique approach that kind of meshes operational data in API traffic.
Absolutely. So if I had to summarize it in a few words, it would be end-to-end visibility. And with this IoT-driven approach to protecting APIs, we understand that just as critical to protecting the API inventory and the IT infrastructure on the right, we have the whole vehicle, connected vehicle infrastructure on the left, including the data and the systems and the communications. And only by looking at the combination of the two, we can provide smart mobility stakeholders that full end-to-end visibility of their infrastructure and that end-to-end protection of their APIs and of their smart mobility assets and of their connected vehicles.
Fantastic. So that brings us to the end of this session. We'll be happy to take any questions if we have time for them.
I think we have just one question. We'll have time for just one question. So I'm going to jump right in. I had a few, but this one came in from one of the viewers. Can you expand a little bit more on the comment about 30% of automaker revenue will come via apps by 2030?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me take it quickly. When we think of software-defined vehicles, the vehicle that we buy from the dealer on day X has nothing to do with the vehicle we own on day X plus 30, right? With over-the-air updates, vehicles are more like our iPhones, right? They are continuously updated. And if you think about Teslas, they have a 10-day kind of a scrum, right? Where new software is being pushed to the vehicle. Now, as new software is being pushed, it's not just about delivering an exceptional digital experience as you're driving your vehicle, it's also introducing new revenue streams. So whether it's all those kind of autopilot, autonomous features, or the BMW heated seats where you need to pay $20 a month to have your seat nice and warm. All these new features are what are driving new revenue streams for OEMs, and all of them, almost with no exception, are based on APIs and fueled by APIs. So the attack vectors expand dramatically.
That makes a lot of sense, and also highlights the need for really that security throughout the entire life cycle and the broader ecosystem that support cars, right? Because really, you're right, it's not just about the machine itself anymore. It's everything that powers it. That was a great session. Thank you both so much. Really interested.
Thank you for having us.
More about Upstream and what you guys are doing. That was fascinating.